This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gould.
Welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. I am indeed Steve Gould. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming back for more stories. If you're new to the podcast, thank you for finding us. I think you're going to like it. Like I just said, men and women in law enforcement, their most intense moments. You really get to hear what it's like to be a police officer, and I think it's important to get it out there, and I'm excited about all the new listeners, ratings, and reviewings. I so appreciate it on Apple Podcasts, and the show is brought to you, as always, by the Patreon supporters. You can go to the link in the show notes. If you really, really love the show, you can go there, show your support. There's a couple different tiers you can choose. You get a couple different things. Either tier, I'll send you vinyl, it's a vinyl sticker, Things Police See sticker. You get direct access to me. You get direct access to the Patreon page. It's a really good time. So if you really love the show, that's the best way to support. You can go there. Also, I newly made, it's also a link in the show notes, a wish list for the podcast studio. They're kind of big ticket items, so it's kind of like a dream list. But believe it or not, once in a while, I do have someone who's crazy about the show, and they will send a lump sum of money. So I figured, if you could help with the production of the show and things that are failing. I've had a few pieces of equipment, including the computer and webcam that I had to replace recently, which totally sucked. So if you just have way too much money, you can find that link in the show notes as well. But guys, I appreciate you. I appreciate you keeping the boat afloat. Without you guys, really, really couldn't do it. So thank you. Thank you so much. Today's episode is going to be a fantastic one. We have a multifaceted guest, as so many of them are. He is a retired detective sergeant who served in Idaho and Washington from 1991 to 2021. He's instructed hundreds of officers and analysts in Washington State on counter-terrorism techniques for law enforcement agency, as well as police leadership courses at the State Police Academy. As a published author, Alan was featured guest speaker at the 2022 Writers Police Academy in Appleton, Wisconsin, assisting best-selling authors with their writing. He currently lives in Edmonds, Washington, where he owns a private investigation agency and a consulting firm, while also playing the saxophone in 2 Seattle rock bands, which I think is really cool. So I think I saw on his website, it said he's an interrupted musician, interrupted for a little period of time there, Alan. So without further ado, let me bring on Alan Hardwick, ladies and gentlemen. Alan!
What's going on, man?
Hey, brother. Great to have you, man. I love it behind you. It's a guitar set up. Is that your studio?
It is. This is my multi-faceted workspace. So, whenever I get bored and lonely, I can just reach behind me and grab a guitar and whittle out a jam. That's
awesome. You come home from a hard day of patrol, you sit down and just strum the blues, something like that?
I mean, sometimes I didn't even come home. I'm not going to lie, I might have taken the guitar with me to work a couple of times.
Oh, that's great. I mean, especially that's great PR, too. Do you play it for in the park for the kids and stuff?
I mean, don't get crazy with your ideas here, Steve. It was fun, but there was a risk to it. Everyone had ideas about, oh wow, you could totally be like the guy at the street corner and lure people in and then arrest them. I'm like, okay, I just want to play some music, man. Just leave me alone.
Yeah, let me use my extracurricular activity to arrest bad guys.
That's right. I mean, it's not that I didn't do that. I'm just saying I still like to play the music. So whatever.
Oh, that's awesome, man. It's great to have. It's great to have coppers with other marketable skills. I think a lot of us feel like it's not true, but a lot of us do feel like we don't have any other skills.
Well, let's not say it's entirely not true. I mean, there might be some truth to that in some cases, right? But no, you're totally right, Steve. There's so much talent and ability that police officers bring to the table, and half the time they forget that they have it, or they think it's not applicable to the job. And that's one of my missions, is to actually draw that out of people and help them remember who they actually are, and not pretending to be the iconic thing of a police officer that they think they're supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. What's your connection to Chris Luttrell, past guest and friend of mine?
That freak show, man, that guy's awesome. He's Chris Luttrell is so he and I met teaching leadership at the police academy for first line supervisors. And we were part of the cadre of instructors that had been shoulder tapped at one point to come and learn how to be a super cool instructor for that class by a few others that were already doing it. And we finally got to teach a class together, and we just had a hoot of a good time. So
Yeah.
bouncing stuff off of each other and telling stories and trying not to one up each other and all that. It was a good time.
He's a good man. You must know Donovan Hebner also.
I know a Fred Havner. I don't know Donovan.
Okay. I thought he was at, I don't know, his episode's coming out tomorrow. I thought he was at Washington, because there's just one academy, right?
Dude, there's like 7 million people here. I mean, come on.
Is there that many?
I don't know. Made that up too.
There's about to be some less, though. I heard they're getting rid of ARs, so you might lose some of the country folk.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, my kid lives in Idaho, so no, I'm not supposed to say that out loud in terms of.
Right. Have you seen that Greater Idaho idea? Have people seen that? Like idea that, I mean, it's a cool idea to make like Idaho go all the way, like cut way into Washington and basically just leave Washington with their port and be like, well, that's all you guys really want anyways. We'll just take the rest of the state. I'm like, it's a cool idea, but I can't imagine that working.
It's pretty funny. Idaho has a port, by the way. It's called Lewiston. Yeah, it's this little town on the Columbia River, or the Snake, right where anyway, it's a town, and it's inland. It's not on a coast, but it's still a port. But it's a great little place there. And Idaho flipped the script by saying, maybe instead of everyone moving to Idaho, we'll just move Idaho to them, and expand the borders and
I love it.
Make it go that way. Yeah,
thinking
it's
outside
kind of
the
an old
box.
idea. Yeah, there was a state of Columbia was put forth many years ago by some right-wing constitutionalists or something, and they wanted to isolate from everything and make their own state, and that kind of fell through the cracks a few times, probably for good reason. But yeah, this idea that Eastern Washington, which has a very different kind of demographic from Western Washington, and that happens in a lot of states. Montana even has that a little bit, and I'm sure California does too, north and south. Or maybe Orange County and everything else,
Right. Yeah.
That type of thing exists, right? So Idaho is kind of a pretty universal flavor in the state, and so the people in Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon and some other places like that, and thought it'd be cool to band together, I guess.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I knew until I lived in Southern California and lived with a bunch of guys that were either injured in the job or retired coppers that were working at backgrounds, and they were all talking about moving to their land in Idaho. And growing up on the East Coast, all I knew about Idaho was potatoes. I was like, potato farms. The only thing I knew was my family, half my family's from Ireland. They left pig farms and potato farms. Idaho had potato farms. I just figured it wasn't anything to look at. And then they're showing me pictures of Idaho. The place is amazing. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous, but it's over. I looked at Zillow, and you ain't moving there unless you got some bucks at this point.
Yeah, it depends. It's not so bad, honestly. It's still, compared to Western Washington or maybe where you're at, it's still pretty good. There's a lot of places that are near those urban centers. Okay, there's an urban center, Boise,
right,
and then Coeur d'Alene a little bit, but still, even on the outskirts of either one of those, you can still get a pretty affordable situation. Although I continue to be shocked when I hear people talking about moving to Kentucky and other places in the Midwest, and they're going to get a 10-acre farm with a 10-room house and stuff like that for $325 or something.
Yeah. No, I mean, it used to be really good. Like my wife and I looked at Eastern and Central Tennessee like 5 years ago, and it was straight up like, mountain views, 10 acres, recently redone farmhouse, and it was like $240, and I was like, and now those same places are like $480, so they're still affordable, but they're not 5 years ago prices. But
so true. My wife has a good mantra about it. She just says, it's just money, we'll make more.
Right. I like that.
live where you actually want to be, and
right.
and do that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, can you take us way back to a young Officer Hardwick on the street, his first hot call or first call that really got your heart pumping?
Oh, God. Well, a young officer, I was, what was I, 23, I guess, when I got hired, something like that.
Just a baby.
1991, so if I do the math, borrow from 9, I was 23, and I didn't know anything about policing. I mean, I had an Adam 12 lunchbox when I was a first grader, and that was about the end of it in terms
Nice.
of preparation. So when I got the job, it was because I just needed a job, and the newspaper in Moscow and Pullman that day had an ad for a road deputy for temporary full time. And I'm like, sweet, that sounds really good. And it was double what I was making as a bus driver and music teacher at a private school. So I was like, okay, which was still close to about $1,000 a month. Anyway,
Yeah, I'll
took
take it.
that job. Yeah, all right. And finally pay a bill. So took the job and fell in love with it. It was such a weird thing, though. My family freaked out. They're like, "You're not a cop. You're a musician. What are you doing? You've never even been in a fight," which was mostly true. I didn't fully disclose the time I punched my neighbor in the mouth because he was, anyway, being a jerk. But I felt so bad after I did it. Anyway, we got along fine. So, but the first hot call, God, I mean, I just remember going to this collision, and it was shortly after I was off of FTO, and we're driving the '88 Crown Vic, and that screaming monster could really get up to speed after you hit 40 or so on a downhill slope. Then it could really go, and I made it do that, heading from Moscow to Potlatch, Idaho, trying to get there before the accident gets worse, which is the whole goal, right?
Right.
So I punched it on the top of Moscow Mountain, headed north on whatever road that is. God, it's been a while. And I broke 100 miles an hour. And that was the first time I had done that ever. And I was so excited because the little yellow dotted lines in the middle of the road became dots, and then they just kind of blended together. And
Right.
Crown Vic was kind of riding
Warp
high.
speed.
It's like, woo! And on the radio was Danger Zone. And I'm like, yes, this is so cool. It was so elating. And I got there and it was just nothing in terms of a wreck, but
Yeah.
boy, I sure got there.
Yeah. So many first calls are like that. You're screaming to get there. Your heart's pumping. You're ready for the worst. And it's just,
Wah, wah, wah.
yeah, exactly. When you first came on, Alan, back in the day, what was the training like in Idaho? What did they make you, what would they make you do if you're like trainee / full time?
Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know if this was true for the agency I worked at, Latah County. Great little department. At the time, we had 14 sworn deputies, and I think we had 2 detectives, and everyone else was a patrol officer or deputy or whatnot. The training, well, the guy that did my background, really cool guy, Tom Blewett. He did my background and said, "Yeah, okay, you're perfect." I'm like, "I've never done anything like this." Like, no, you're this is good because you're different than everybody else. I'm like, what is
Moldable.
you feel good? All right. So what do I need to do to get ready for this? He says, just show up and we'll train you. This is really great. You don't have a lot of previous expectations. I'm like, that's for sure. So they had an FTO program, which was kind of a cutting edge thing for Northern Idaho at the time. Of actually training people with a book, an FTO manual and that sort of thing. There wasn't a lot of that going on back then.
You can read, right, Alan?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Are you breathing? Here, wear this. Here's your gun. Go forth and do good to the community.
Right.
But they did. I had a full-on 7 weeks of field training with a great guy, Brandon Jordan, my first FTO, and we hit the road and learned a lot. And by day 2, I was driving a police car, and then learned all the stuff that they have in the SOP manuals and blah blah, all the stuff
Sure.
you're supposed to know. Which I was kind of smart in terms of book smart. I could learn things pretty quickly, so that was easy. And then, but getting to that point was actually the crazy part. I didn't have anything. I mean, I was a pretty broke college kid, really, and I was recently married, so I definitely didn't have anything in terms of resources. I was working at a wood shop part time, helping this guy who was this master craftsman wood shop guy, and he would hire college kids that were destitute to give them a half-time job or something. So I learned the trade, and I had a pair of boots that I wore to the wood shop because it was freezing cold out in the barn in the middle of Idaho. It's everything you can imagine about being out there somewhere in a secretive little 300-acre farm that is actually a wood shop. That was life on the weekends. And I had a pair of boots, And those were the boots that I had to use when I was given my uniform. My uniform at the sheriff's office was a pair of wool trousers and a long sleeve wool shirt with the badge and patch.
Right.
And they said the rest of it I had to go get myself.
Oh,
So I think I scrounged up every bit of the $90 I could find, and I went up to a pawn shop in Spokane and picked up a Sam Brown belt, a speed loader, and a speed loader holster, which I didn't know that existed.
yeah.
A pair of handcuffs, some Smith and Wesson handcuffs, which I still have today, and then a handcuff case. That was it. And so,
Wow.
but I didn't have boots except for the ones I wore at the wood shop, and they were maroon. Well, that was
Ooh,
again.
That's not going to look good. Yeah.
No dice. But we worked at a wood shop, and so we had stuff. We had chemicals and bleach and dye and stain, and so, yep, I dumped my.
Did you really stain your own boots?
I am not making this up. I dumped them in the bleach tank, bleached them out, and then dyed them in some ebony stain, and then polished them with black polish. But when those would wear off a little bit, you could still see that maroon hint coming through. So
Yeah.
I had to constantly shine the boots, but it worked.
Wow. That's nuts. How long was your academy? Just not too long?
Oh, academy. Yeah, that came about 5 months later.
Yeah, that's the old school way.
You're on the road, you learn the job, and then 5 months later, they send you to the academy. The rule in Idaho, the law was you had to be through the academy within the first year of employment. Otherwise, you could no longer be on the road, be a police officer.
Yeah, it kind of gives them a chance to feel you out, right? So they can kind of get on, do some calls, see if you kind of have a knack for it, and then maybe show you the door before they buy the academy for you.
It's a kind of an informal probationary period. I really liked it, though. It actually gave me a leg up when I went to the academy. Some agencies, Boise, and others would send people to the academy first, like they do typically most places. But this gave me a leg up in terms of what the actual work of the day looked like. And so I had numerous interactions with the public, DVs and traffic stops and hot calls and all the rest. So I felt like I had a pretty good handle on things. And turned out I did. I topped out at the academy, was top graduate. And for a musician, that was pretty cool,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was the same for me when I started in 2006, and for the on Cape Cod, which is like a vacation area, and the state of Mass at the time had waivers, so you could have the part-time academy, which was you could have part-time status, like work as a reserve, and you could get a waiver to keep working for like a hardship almost for the department. Well, every time summer rolled around in Cape Cod, they're like, we really need you. We can't send you to academy this time. So I'd already worked 6 months, worked again, came around again. Hey, we just need you to hang out one more summer. And it was just me and this other guy I went to high school with, and we're looking at each other like, you got to be kidding me. They're never going to send us, because the state had no limitation on waivers. They just kept giving us the waiver. So we were like almost 2 years on the job before academy. But like you said, it was huge to have done the job. It made the academy, almost like the academy, you can almost just go brain dead, because it's, a lot of it's the big game of shouting at you, and, it's just, you just kind of know it's all kind of silly. And there was such a great mixture of people that were taking it like super serious, like people off the civil service list that had never seen anything, like never even shot a gun. And then there was like people like us that had already done stuff. And then thankfully also there was military guys, so they could show us how to do the parade stuff, which was totally foreign. Right. I remember we had a postmaster. He was 46 years old, the oldest guy in our academy, retired as a postmaster, and then went to police academy. And this was the guy where like we'd be like, we're on like week 18, like 3 or 4 weeks from graduating, and they go like, supposed to do a left turn as a platoon, and he would go right, like that guy. It was hilarious, but he could run, so that's really all they cared about. Go ahead.
Yeah, we had the same type of thing. Actually, Idaho was a little bit progressive in this idea, where they didn't do all the bracing and the super hardcore, drill sergeant type stuff. They'd really relaxed a lot of that activity. When I came back to Washington and saw the lateral academy, and I saw that happening with the basic recruits, I'm like, woo, I don't know, not sure. That's kind of, hardcore.
That sucks.
Even, yeah, like, dude. Just fake it, man.
Yeah.
It's real. There's life after the academy.
Yeah.
But it was nice. And but we did do some marching and stuff like that. But that was easy for me because I was in band, and so
Right.
I
Yeah.
was a drum major in the high school band in Centralia, and so I knew how to do a drill down, and
You know all about
I,
rhythm. You're a musician.
I even knew what an applicable fricative was, so I could tell when they were what they were saying on the field. Anyway, it was pretty fun.
That's awesome. Alan, can you describe a strange or bizarre thing you've dealt with on the job?
I mean, the funny thing about doing police work is that most of these things you forget within a day. I come home at the end of a shift and kids would say, "Hey, how was work today?" And you'd be like, "Ah, it's fine," which meant you survived. I made it
Right.
home in one piece. Goal achieved. Check. And if it was a hard day, you didn't really want to, muddle through all that because you're trying to be done with it and set it aside.
Right.
And if it was a great day, it was usually inappropriate, so for
Right.
kids, or, it could be cool and I might have a little story, but they would dig on me. The kids, I had 5 kids and as they got older, especially, they would like, come on, now what happened? We saw you today. You were running up the hill with your lights on. What was happening then? I'm like, oh yeah, I did that.
Right.
Okay. Well, what did you do? Oh, well, there was a T-bone collision, and there's some guy who was hanging half out the car over the woods. Whoa! It'd be like freaked out. And to me, it was like I hadn't even considered the impact of it after I finished my report. Because you go to the next thing.
Right.
So when you ask, what's something kind of strange or whatever, God, there's so many of them that I've forgotten. It actually is what led me to start writing things down late in my career to try to capture these things and remember them. And then
Right.
now, I'm driving down the road and, a bug hits the windshield or something. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's that one time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Comes back in the worst ways. But early on I had, I don't know. One of the funniest things I remember in terms of strange circumstances was I was a patrol sergeant in Edmonds, and we got this call of somebody that had hit a rock. Well, there was this boulder in this lady's yard, and it was on a curve, and people would routinely drive through her yard missing the curve, and so she put this huge boulder in the way, thinking that would
Nice.
stop it. Well, what is it Gordon Graham says? Predictable is preventable. Well, that doesn't prevent the driving aspect of it; just prevents her yard getting messed up. So,
Right.
and indeed, that's what happened. Some dude took the corner too fast, and rather than squirrel into her yard, he collided with the great big rock. But then he drove off, and as he drove off, because it didn't disable the car, he of course fishtailed all the way through her yard. So like, damn, that didn't work out. So we go there, and she's like, rocking car, squirrel. So we put out the APB, whatever. Find the car. We find the car. It's at the pot shop. This is shortly after marijuana was legalized in Washington. And we find the car. It's this bright yellow, brand new BMW. Just a really screaming machine. And so it's parked on the hill adjacent to the pot shop. So we're like, okay. So a couple of our officers go down there. They walk into the pot shop. First thing that happens is the gal that works at the front counter demands to see ID from the cops because
Of course.
She's got rules. We have to identify everybody that comes in the door, or we're in
Right.
trouble.
Is this a
she's
test?
And she, usually I would frown on my officers pointing to their badge or saying, you got to listen to me and she did, but she did it this time and it worked out pretty well. This is my ID. Oh, okay. So,
Right.
Do you have a customer that owns this thing? Oh yeah, he's right over there. Okay, thanks. So they go over and they talk to this guy. Hey, sir, we need to talk to you about the collision you were in. And he's just like totally ignoring her. Sir, we need to talk to you about the collision. So it's this one of our corporal, who's a female, who was outstanding. I love this woman. And then one of the old time officers who was, oh God, he's a germaphobe and super snarky and super intelligent. So this is the pair that I had that went to this, confront this
Right.
guy. So third time, he's still not responding. And right before they go hands on to get his attention, the gal at the front counter yells back and says, "Hey, he's deaf. He can't hear you." I'm like,
Oops.
oh, shit. Okay, so she taps on his shoulder, and he's like, "What?" And so she's like, "You were in a she gets her notepad out, starts writing. "You were in a crash. He just like does the whole I don't know
Yeah,
thing.
of course.
So like, no, can you come out with your car with us? Okay. So he comes out to the car. He's like 25 years old, a fully capable guy. He's just deaf. So they walk out there and they get toward the car and she's like, see, there's damage, and he's saying stuff and he's hard to understand. It looks like he's maybe signing, and so she gets her pad out and says, I need your license, registration, and insurance, and he becomes a little bit harder to understand. He's still talking,
Yeah.
and the older officer's like, I learned later, he's like, I recognize this guy somehow. I don't know how to know this guy. Well, it turned out he was an SRO before. He was a school resource officer.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, the not the deaf guy.
Oh,
The come on, Steve, keep up. It's the older the older officer.
okay.
And so he's like thinking, I think I know this guy. So finally, they tell him, well, come on over here. We need to. They're thinking maybe he's a DUI. And like, oh wow, this is gonna be a challenge, So, but all of a sudden, he kind of bolts for the car. Now, turns out he was probably just going to get something he thought of that would be helpful. You don't know that though, right?
Right.
So he bolts for the car, and they're like, don't get in there. If you're drunk or high or whatever, we need to not let you drive. And right then the fight's on. So here's these two officers fighting with this deaf guy, and they're rolling around on this little road. And it's raining now, and they roll into a ditch. It's filling up with water fast, and it's just a totally chaotic scene. So the world comes. They get him cuffed up, but he won't. He's still not cooperating. He's kicking, and he's just having a hard day. So finally, the paramedics get there, and they're trying to talk to him. And one of them says, he's deaf. He can't hear you. And by this time, the officer, we'll just call him Officer Smith, because actually that was his name. Anyway, it'll still work.
There's a lot of Smiths.
Right? Yeah. So he's like, oh, I think we can hear me just fine. He's like, what? That's totally insensitive, dude. And now I'm there, and I'm the supervisor, and I got to be,
Sure.
appropriate and leader and all the rest. So I'm like, okay, Smith, do you know this guy? Yeah, he's an asshole. Like, what?
We figured that out.
What do you mean? He says, yeah, I had him as a student at the high school, and he was an asshole then, and he's an asshole now. I'm like, okay, well, but what are we going to do here? He says, well, he's under arrest for obstructing, and for hit and run. Okay, fair enough. So they go to ask him a question or something, and the medics are having a hard time communicating with him, of course, right? And up to this point, they hadn't got him handcuffed yet. They just kind of restrained him, because they weren't really sure what to do.
Right.
But at this point, he's starting to kick, and so Officer Smith handcuffs him, and then asks him a question. And then the paramedics get offended because he's asking a deaf guy, which they'd figured out he was deaf, a question, and he says, "Dude, he can't even answer you. You handcuffed him, so he can't hear, and now he can't talk." It's like, and Smith's like, "Oh yeah, hey," he says to the guy, "Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" And the guy goes, "No." Okay,
Yeah.
we're done here.
Yeah.
So,
my cousin is deaf, and she can read lips like nobody's business.
exactly, and that's what Smith knew. That he remembered this guy. He's like, okay, this guy is an expert in communication, from lip reading to body language to all of it. He actually, it's a severe disability, but he was able to navigate it really, really well. And what he would do is just use it to his advantage. Super unfortunate, really frustrating for anyone that's actually trying to help him.
Yeah. When it's convenient, kind of like the people that are bilingual, but when you speak with them, they're like, no sé, no hablo, but they do speak English.
The other crazy one I had that I thought of when you asked me the question was I was on the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and I'm a musician, right? So let's put him in intelligence and then assign him to the FBI. Whatever. So I wound up leading these international terrorism investigations, and one of them involved a dude who smuggled some weapons from Pakistan into Afghanistan, and then came to the Seattle area in our AOR, and so we got the lead to track him down and see if he was just a guy with an opportunity, or if he was a cold-blooded bad guy or something.
Right.
So one day I go to interview his father, and his father was in his 70s, and he was not a warlord per se, but he was a well-respected guy in Afghanistan back in the day who had moved to North Seattle and was living there at the time. And so we got to go into this guy's house and interview him. And he invited us in and went down to the basement. And his wife, who was never seen, she just snuck in and out with food and drinks, tea and stuff like this. And we're all new to this
Good
realm
woman.
of well, she's very obedient. But we also knew that while that was the face of it, we learned that these women had amazing amounts of power in the home, and it wasn't like they were total subservient or anything. It was just a modality.
It doesn't seem to
that they
matter
functioned with.
the cultural setup. Women always have a lot of power in the home.
There's no absence of it. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, so she brought us these things, and I'm with another guy there who was from NCIS, and he wound up going on to interview high value detainees at Guantanamo the following year. But at that time, he was just an NCIS dude with some extra time on his hands, so he came and assisted me on an interview. And neither of us knew what it was on the plate that we'd been served. It was this fuzzy nut thing, and the guy was trying to explain that.
Yeah, no thanks.
We tried not to go, ooh,
Yeah, you gotta eat it
out loud, but it's like, what do I do? So okay, well, we took our shoes off, and that's kind of like against the rules in police worlds. So
right.
we're all right. I'm all in. We're gonna do this thing. I'm gonna get poisoned today. I'm gonna freaking die at the hands of a terrorist father. Anyway, we'll see what happens. They were so good, man. You peel this fuzzy part off. They were about, I'm not joking, they were about that big around. And they had this kind of powdery stuff on the inside. I don't know what they were called. He said it. I remembered it that day, but you remember the thing about forgetting? Anyway.
Yeah. Some kind of fig or something?
Sure. I don't know. Jeez.
Weird.
Yeah, but it was delicious. Sweet and yummy and risky as hell. But we survived, and then we had the story of the fuzzy nuts forever, and that went a long ways at headquarters. So, yeah, Hardwick and the other dude, John, we went and had fuzzy nuts at this Afghan's house. We ate the guy's fuzzy nuts. Anyway, whatever. It went a long ways.
And I'm guessing he probably didn't have anything to do with this thing with his son.
Dude, that's classified. You think I can tell you that shit?
You're retired. Come on.
25-year rule, isn't that it? Wait a minute. Did that get leaked already? I think I'm good. Yeah. No, he jury's out on the son in terms of where he was. Really, the kid was he was a supreme dork, is what he was. He tried to be famous and popular and stuff like that. He just couldn't achieve it because he just really wasn't that smart.
Oh, gotcha.
So I think that he was trying to involve himself with something that would give him some prestige. That's my assessment of it at that particular case. And we followed, his activities for about 2 years. Had an investigation on it for a while, but and he had some connectivity. But it turns out it's like 7 steps to bacon. At some point, you're going to have connectivity with somebody's uncle who's a bad guy or something. So.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to parse that out when you're dealing with that, especially if they get anybody reaching out from the U.S. to them. They're going to be interested. They're not going to know exactly what this person's capable of. They know he's American, has citizenship, and is, the same ethnicity. They try to use him. Was this like a really rich family, or did they kind of just settle in the middle class in the U.S.?
In Afghan standards, they were a rich family. In the U.S., lower middle class is about where they would land.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah. So, but pretty capable. I really admire people from the Middle East, especially Afghanistan, and their ability to be entrepreneurs and to come up with something that can make money. It's just fascinating at the drive and willingness to try things and just keep at it until it works. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
We really met some interesting people.
I noticed that when I did fraud investigations for an insurance company for a couple of years. And, you'd investigate everything from straight up, this is fraud to it just seems kind of weird because on paper, but I met all different ethnicities and, you do kind of get this feeling that like that fire, that entrepreneurship real. How do you say it? Entrepreneurship.
The business mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Entrepreneurial mindset is kind of dead with Americans. Like, because when you look at the people who just came here, they're like on fire for it. They see this place like with the eyes that our great grandparents and great great grandparents saw it, all the opportunity, and a lot of Americans are just kind of dead on the inside. There's nothing here for me. I can't do anything, and they just see it totally different. A lot of these people I interviewed had 3 cars, had no loans on the cars. They owned the cars. They paid cash for the cars. They lived in a pretty okay neighborhood for how long they've been here for. And it just all looks weird on paper when there's a big insurance claim. But a lot of times it would all just check out. They just had, and they don't use banks, a lot of them. They just have a lot of cash on hand. It just, like you said, it's inspiring. It's like, wow, they're really doing it. They're like, it's like they're following the Dave Ramsey program. No debt, baby. Just straight up cash. Yeah.
It's cash in a hawala and you're good to go. Yeah.
Right. Alan, can you tell us your most intense or terrifying call you dealt with?
Yeah. It's funny. I had to start keeping track. Like I said about the stories. The same was true with the stories that were impactful in a negative way. I have a list on my phone. It's called the majors. And one day I was at a conference put on by there's a Seattle firefighter retired, and a police officer, and both are involved in the medical community as well. And they started an organization called First Responder Conferences, and they do these conferences around the country now. And they're outstanding. It gets into a lot of wellness and other topics, and not just from your classic officer wellness. Make sure you breathe right and stuff like that, and think good thoughts. But to finance,
just quit your worrying. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. But they really take a very holistic approach to wellness for officers. And first responders, and put it into this conference thing, and they walk you through some stuff. And so going through the stuff, I wound up thinking about things I hadn't thought about, and realized kind of all the stuff that was in my backpack I was carrying around without even thinking about it.
I'm sure.
So I started writing it all down. And the list was way longer than I thought. And I've built on it over the years, of course, added more things and remembered things along the way. But the one that really takes the cake for me was the death of my best friend. I was in Boise, 1997, and Mark Stahl was a police officer who'd come from Los Angeles Sheriff's Office. And he'd been hired in the early 90s like me. He was working corrections there and about to get on the road. And he and his wife, Cheryl, decided to take off and go to the great state of Idaho. And so they moved up to Idaho. Mark got a job at the Ada County Sheriff's Office in Boise as a corrections deputy, and then quickly was able to make the jump to Boise PD as a patrol officer with the city.
That's a busy city, too. I mean, that's a major city for sure.
Yeah. And at the time, when I was hired there in 93, I was hired there. I was one of 93 officers at the time. And 450 of us competed for those spots that were open that day. Like 3 spots were open.
The good old days when people applied.
Yeah, right? Yeah. You're a background guy. You get it. It's like, okay, we can take the cream of the crop and forget about the rest.
Right.
It's not that way anymore necessarily. Fortunately, there's still good candidates. But anyway, I digress. So Mark came up, and he and I became fast friends. We were the 2 guys on the department that had the first cell phones that could fit in your pocket. They had the brick ones that had the backpack, and
right.
Even the one that was attached inside the car and that sort of thing, and used satellites or whatever. Those were cool. But I had the Nokia 4600 or something like that, little stubby antenna that you could pull out.
I play Snake on it.
Shut up. Okay. This is so true. Yeah. Then when Minesweeper came along, oh my God.
Yeah.
Amazing. Anyway, Mark and I were good friends, and he had 2 kids, and I had 3, I think at the time. You lose track after 3. Anyway, yeah, 93, 94. Yeah, because number 3 was born in 95. So we worked together from 94 until 97. In 96, I went to detectives. So I was in a school resource officer position in the detective bureau, and Mark was still on the road, but we interacted a ton still, sharing information and bridging that gap between patrol and detectives. And then we would do barbecues on our weekends, and our families spent time together and all the rest. We were great friends. And really, he was the greatest friend I'd had. And then I got the call that night, that awful night, September, from my buddy Joe, who was the city's prosecutor at the time. He called me and said that Mark had been shot and that it didn't look good and I needed to get down there. So I zoomed down and stood in the hospital while they were working on him. He had been shot by a couple of guys from Pennsylvania who just came to Boise to stir things up. They wound up shooting him and Ron Weiniger. Ron survived. He was shot in the ass. We made a lot of good out of that.
Right, sure.
But yeah, and he wound up becoming the chief there for a number of years. So Ron Weiniger was a great, great human, still a fantastic human. But Mark did not survive. And I have that image fixed in my head of my footprint on the floor of the hospital in Mark's blood. And that thing has been a pretty constant image to me while we were, just waiting, watching, and hoping for the best, but it didn't happen. Man. So that was pretty intense. But I got to be honest with you, it's some really beautiful things happened through that. In fact, Mark's father-in-law, Arnold Ruby, wrote a book about it called Fallen Brother in Blue. And it kind of tells the whole account. But the sweet thing about it, and sorry, Ernie, I'm going to blow it here. But the sweet thing was Mark and Cheryl had been in an argument a little bit that night when he went to work at 8:00. And so they didn't leave on the best of terms that they had always promised to do. So he called her at midnight and stopped at a payphone because his cell phone wasn't working. So he stopped at a payphone, dropped a dime, and they had a quick conversation. It was fine. It's like a regular thing, just a minor argument or whatever.
Right.
They just didn't like to leave it that way. So he made sure not to leave it that way. And a half hour later, he was killed. Yeah.
Wow.
So just a really powerful thing. So his 2 kids, Jonelle and Julia, were my older son's ages. And they wound up then going to school together for a couple of years. Me and my family, we moved back to Washington, stayed in touch. I stayed in touch with Cheryl. And then my family went through its own chaos and craziness and wound up being a single dad. And got a therapist, and my therapist told me, Alan, you need to take the kids on a vacation. And so I did, went back to Idaho. And long story short, Julia, number 2, Mark's second daughter, and Devin, my second son, fell madly in love at the ripe age of 16 and tried to pretend it didn't exist. Both of them had their own separate chaotic ways until this year in April when they were married.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, and I made a promise to Mark before he died. Actually, we had this, agreement that we would make sure that if ever anything happened, we would make sure that the kids were well cared for and that sort of thing. And so I went for the first time to go visit his grave in April when my son and Julia got married, and finally went up to that gravesite that I'd kind of avoided ever since he was buried, and had that conversation about a promise fulfilled.
Yeah.
So, it was rich.
That's tough, man. That is brutal. I mean, you never think when you get into police work, you really don't ever think you're going to lose one of your friends.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody is really prepared for that. It could happen, but they really realize that the night in the hospital. Wow. That's intense, man. Well, thank goodness you stayed in touch with the family, and now you are family, literally.
Yeah.
I mean,
right?
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I can't. I mean, it's so unanticipated, like you say, and then so incredibly fulfilling and moving. They wound up Boise. The city really came behind policing at that moment. Boise at the time had been through a series of 6 officer-involved shootings in a short period of time. Really unusual, and the community was in the regular form of outrage that you hear when there's line of duty deaths and stuff like that.
Sure.
But it wasn't until Mark died that the silent majority showed up, and the people that really support the police all the time but don't really feel that there's a need to say so, they came out. We had a procession that went from the Boise State Pavilion down at Boise State University up to the graveside out in Eagle. And the entire route was lined with people the whole way, 7 miles of people standing on the side of the road, saluting,
Wow.
flags up, the whole 9 yards. And they wound up building a police station and put it on Markstall Drive. The whole thing has really become a life of its own. Officers still sign in for their daily tour with Mark as a shadow partner on their CAD system. So
that's really touching. That's cool.
It's really awesome. Yeah, the things that came out of it were just really, really beautiful. A fantastic legacy. So
yeah, well, as they say, God works in mysterious ways, right? You never know what's going on. That's an amazing story, Alan. Alan, can you tell us a heartwarming encounter you had on the job?
There's again, so many. I'll talk about this one. There was an officer who had basically gotten kicked out of another agency nearby because she couldn't do directions very well. She's listening to this. She knows exactly who I'm talking about. Anyway, she was horrible with a map. She couldn't figure it out,
Thank goodness for GPS.
Comes to mind. Well, right. And so the big debate at the time was, can we let these new officers use their little Tom thing or whatever and stick it in the window and leave a mark? And of course, the old school guys are like, no, you got to use a crayon, and use the map and pull it out of the map book and use the grid, and they got to know where they're at.
Learn the streets.
Absolutely. And of course that's true that you got to figure that out. But can you do the job in the meantime? And I argued that you could, and just use the technology so that we can help these people to be successful. And you know what? If that's the mistake they make that day, let's count your mistakes you make today. They happen all the time. So we have to just navigate that and mitigate our weaknesses. So anyway, we hired her at great risk, and but she was a fantastic human, and now she's a corporal, detective, and she was a detective and she has backgrounds. Check it out, right? And so she understands the value of bringing this eclectic work to the table. When she was my trainee, I was a field training officer, and I had her for a little while, and she. We went to a call of an 8-year-old who was trying to kill his mom. And he had a pair of scissors, and he was chasing her around the neighborhood with scissors. And apparently it wasn't the first time he'd kind of acted out like this, but this time was a lot more serious. And so we finally basically got him corralled, and he'd calmed down a little bit. And this officer, I took a photograph in the moment of her sitting next to this kid. We'd taken the scissors away from him, but she didn't handcuff him. She put up a security plan so that if he bolted again, we'd be able to grab him quickly and keep him from hurting himself or anybody else. But her interaction with the kid was like, Aunt May. I mean, it was just like, I'm kind of your cool aunt that you wish you could hang out with all the time. And we're just going to sit here and chill for a while. And she found a book. I don't know if she had it with her or what. It was a book with about Shrek, a little children's, picture book or whatever.
Right.
And so she gave him this book and was asking him a couple of questions, and then kind of ignoring him, and then maybe asking him a question. And it was totally perfect for the moment. And I looked at that and I thought, half of the guys on my team, had they responded to this call and taken the lead, it would have ended very differently. It could have been, crazy or hard, or I don't know. But the way it worked out was just so beautiful. And I thought, you know what? give her the TomTom.
Yeah, give her the damn GPS.
Let's figure out so we can have this human interacting with the public, because what she brings to the table is unique and is going to be perfect at some point along the way. And it sure was that day. And I got a picture of it. And I was so excited about this. And we put that picture up in the hallway for a couple of years. And it really spoke the miles of how sweet it was that, you know, we all bring these different weird things to the table. I'm a musician, you know. My father became a trapper.
Wow.
I know how to skin muskrat pretty fast. What the heck? That's like super weird, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of friends anyway.
Yeah.
But all of that stuff comes to bear in this line of work called law enforcement and being first responders, because of the way that you can interact with people on such a weird and different and unique level at the moment. You know?
Yeah.
So
takes all kinds.
I love that so much. You know, the days of cookie cutter, square draw, you know, Tron, RoboCop type things need to be gone. I mean, there's a piece for that. You know, I want that guy too.
Right. Yeah.
But we all can't be that way. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great story. This is a popular question. Advice for new police officers, candidates, people thinking about it, people on the fence about it. What would you tell them with all your experience?
Well, the fun thing to say these days is run.
Right. Run away.
Run away. Keep running. No. But honestly, my hat's off to anyone who wants to enter this arena. It really is. It's a very challenging time. But I remember when I entered the arena, it was a challenging time then. I mean, when I was in the police academy, Rodney King happened. And half of the people that were in law enforcement were like, oh God, we're done. You know, hell in a handbasket. This is never going to work anymore. You know, and then a few years later, they started to whittle down on our ability to do pursuits, or, you know, the fleeing felon rule started to get ironed out a little differently. Oh my God, it's never going to work. You know, we're going to all fall apart. You know, and so in some sense, today's policing challenges are sort of like that. Now, you can make an argument that there's some fundamental, you know, watershed differences right now. And maybe that's true. But I think if we look at it with the eyes of, you know what, law enforcement just has to happen. And if we can do it in such a way that somehow advances safety for officers and still can get the job done one way or another, then let's just go with it. Keep going. You know, we've all people in law enforcement have been subject to ridicule and over criticism and all of that since the beginning. You know, that has never really changed. It just feels different at one time for another. For most of the older people who were around during George Floyd and some of the other awful things that happened in the last 5 years, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to function anymore? You know,
right.
Well, maybe it's time to go. You know, I'm a huge fan of, if you can retire, you probably should.
Yeah.
Unless you've got a damn good reason to keep going and you have a lot to offer and bring to the table. Okay, if that's the case, fine. But you should never be judged or look back poorly on a decision to leave the industry when you're capable of doing so. If you've, you know, left something good in the wake, leave when it's good. Don't wait for 3 bad days.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Yeah, I know.
Why do you want to
totally agree.
Make everybody miserable?
I know. There's guys that hang on, and you know it's the only thing in their life, and they're just going to go until they like in Mass, there's an age limit. At 65, you got to go. Mass is like going backwards, I think, probably because of money. I'm grandfathered into the old retirement system where after 32 years, which still wasn't that great, it's 32 years, you can go at 55 years old and get 80%. Well, now it's like 62 years and 62 years old and like 34 years of service. Like, do they want old men patrolling the streets? Like, this is like a young person's job. You know what I mean? Like,
well,
you're gonna have people.
That's just it. You have competing interests here, and you know, cities are corporations. They have to make business decisions about getting work done. That's fine. You know, that's an interest that exists, and it's a valid one. But in this line of work, you've got a shelf life, man, and at some point, knees don't function the way they used to, and
Right.
your processes and your expectations and all of that adds up in a weird way. So yeah, it's a young person's job, I think, for the most part. Leadership, having that, legendary understanding and backdrop is super valuable. But
There's
just
just not
because
enough
you're
room up there for everybody. Some people have to stay patrol and they get old and gray. It's like, geez,
that's
this
true.
guy's going to break
And
his hip.
actually, even on the outside, you can still function in a way that impacts the world, and impacts policing and police leadership and stuff, So I don't know. I'm a fan that if they can go, they probably should. But for people that are getting into the job, what I've always said is to people say, hey, Alan, I'm thinking about becoming a police officer. What should I study? How can I best prepare? And I always tell them, study English. Just learn how to write. I mean, because really that's what you do. You tell stories in a police report. You recount things that happened and present that to prosecutors and defense attorneys and.
And relating your perception has never been more important, to do that accurately so that people can see how you felt. That's real important now for use of force. Totally.
Yeah, definitely. And, learning how to do that in a way that doesn't look like you're just regurgitating statutes and policies,
Right.
And I've seen a lot of training that suggests that that's the way to do it. Before you write your use of force report, make sure to refer to the manual and then
hit all the hot terms.
Use those words, and
Right.
like that's a good idea. And in one sense, yeah, you're creating a defensible stance. But what that reads in court and to a jury is like, oh, they're covering stuff up. They're not telling the whole story, because it's not a story anymore.
I grabbed for the assailant's arm to put him into the arm bar transport position.
Yeah.
It's like, he's flailing. There was 6 guys on him.
And I assisted him to the ground.
Aided and assisted, guided him.
Come on, man. You throat punched him and dropped him to his knees. Anyway.
Right.
Anyway, so it's I'm not saying that, there's that that's the right way to write it, but I don't know. It's a challenge. So understanding point of view, understanding how to write, and how to interpret a situation, how to speak in front of people, all of that is super, super valuable stuff. And I'll tell you, I'm sure as a background investigator would understand how valuable it is, and how many times you probably said, this candidate, looks good on paper, but they just don't have a lot of life experience, or they don't have a lot of real world, whatever. Yep. We get that all the time, and that's an intangible a lot of times, because I've had 21-year-olds who hit those marks with high numbers. It's like, oh wow, this guy's really experienced some life and has a context for the world.
Right.
So I don't know. It's get life experience. Go out and do the crazy stuff, and then be honest about it.
Right.
Yeah, boy, we had some crazy ones. I'm sure as a background investigator, you've heard the crazies. Good Lord, the things that people will admit to.
Yeah. They actually took one out when I was at LAPD as a background guy. They used to have a sex with animals question, and I was told they actually removed it because people would, they would say crazy things they did very young. Like once I was 7, and
I'm not sure I want to know this part.
I let the cat lick me, and it's like, and then it's like, all right, they're 7. Everything else, they're psych. Everything else seems fine, but they did say this one thing, and it's not that it happened; it's that you told about it. Why are you
and
telling
now we can't unhear it?
Right.
Like, oh,
so they just got rid of the question. They're like, "Don't ask about animal sex anymore." We're like, this doesn't seem that good of an idea.
The new "don't ask, don't tell" policy. Yeah.
It's exactly.
It's funny, that same question was the one of our background guys was saying that why does this keep happening?
You don't know unless you ask. Yeah.
Oh man, I don't know.
Oh man.
Maybe I don't know. I'm jury's out on that one.
Alan, let's go to your website here. Where can people check you out and pick up your book?
This website, I gotta I started a lacrosse organization at one point. I built some websites. I don't know any of this stuff. I'm a musician, so.
I paid somebody to do this.
I should. It would look decent anyway. This is my.
We got your book cover right here, so.
That's pretty cool, I will say. Yeah, Never Been This Close to Crazy was published in 2019, and it's available on Amazon. If you go to alanhardwick.com, you can click on the book, I think. It'll probably take you to Amazon.
Let's
or
try.
You can search it. Oh, God, is this real life stuff?
Yeah, there it is, available on Amazon.
Bam. Heck? That's super cool.
You did it, Alan. You made it.
Dude, this is like live and direct right now. It's happening.
Yep. There it is.
Oh, my God, there it is.
Bam.
You should hide your wish list, dude.
Yeah, that's a joke wish list I made.
There's I wish anyway. Yeah, there's paperbacks which are down in price. That's cool. And there's a hardback version. These are all print on demand. Super cool. And then there's the ebook as well, the Kindle. And if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, you can just read the thing for free.
Oh, sweet.
And if people are really interested in that sort of thing, just get a hold of me. I'm not too hard to find. I'm in a couple of bands, and you got my Instagram pasted on top of my image right now.
There you go.
Here or something. It's backwards. So yeah, that's fine.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I was honored to have you. Everybody go check Alan out, and I'll put a link in the show notes and on the website for your books, your website, and your Instagram, so they can follow you.
Steve, I really appreciate the work you're doing, and God, keep it going. I think that there's not a better time for law enforcement to be able to tell their stories, and not just wait for them to get on Netflix or Dateline.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I appreciate that, brother. Can you hang out for like a couple minutes while I do the outro?
Yeah, just this once.
All right, brother. The great Alan Hardwick, ladies and gentlemen. Really, really fun interview. Very interesting dude, musician. I wanted to ask him about playing the sax. I was going to ask if Alan could actually play the sax, play like one of those 80s rips. Alan, do you have a saxophone? He's shaking his head. Guys, thank you for checking us out. Thank you for all the ratings and renew. Oh, hold on. Let's get back to Alan right now. You got a sax?
I have my sax. I'm in my studio, dude. What do you think?
Can you play like an 80s rip?
Oh my God. Are you not going to make me do this for real?
Well, it's up to you. I mean,
Jesus. Well, I don't know. What you want? I haven't played this.
Oh yeah, that sounds great.
Oh man. Anyway, whatever.
All right, thank you, sir. I love it. That's awesome. Sax is making a big comeback, man.
What do you mean? It never went away. Where'd you go?
I don't know. I was in the 80s and I didn't hear it for 20 years. I'll be right back. I got to do the outro. Thank you. All right, there he was on the sax, ladies and gentlemen. Awesome. Like I was saying, thank you for the rating and reviewing. If you really want to support the show, Patreon is the place to do it. But if you can't afford that, it's not in the budget right now, I totally understand. The show will remain free. The next best thing you can do is go to Apple Podcasts and give that 5-star review. I truly appreciate that. And right now is the time of the show where we pay homage. We give thanks to none other than the Patreon sergeants. I'm talking about Sarah Pomeroy, Andy Biggs, Greg Gadboy, Adam Mehall, the great Chris June, Gary Steiner, Jake Finito, John Shoemaker, Lauren Stimson, the handsome Lane Campbell, the great Seth Wright, William James Ong, that's Deputy William James Ong to you, James Rose, Tony Fahey, the great Ben Peters, Braden Walker, Corey Payne, Jason Lau, the great Mike Wynn, Nathan Gowan, Sasha McNabb, Scott Minkler, the great Tammy Walsh, Sean Clifford, Dennis, because that's all he put, Motor Cop Chronicles, that's Iceman, George Tessier, Nick New, Scott Young, the great Tom Connell, Wayne Miller, Derek Warden, Burley Boards, that's Dan Carlson, Doug and Kelly Newman, Joe DeFries, Dave Ellman, Elliot Sykes, Holly Vanover, Richard Tolles, Brittany Sims, and almost made it, and my man Christian. Thank you guys so much for the ratings, reviewings, and mostly and totally thank you to the Patreon supporters. You guys are the best. You're keeping the boat afloat. I love you. I need you, and I appreciate you. All right, guys. That's the show for this week. I will catch you next time.